The Big Issue. Breaking down the issues that matter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Podcast. It's another edition of The Big Issue. And of course, as usual, I'm your regular host. George Jagba is my name. And with me here in the studio are our in-house analyst. We have Silas Ezogu. And of course, a foreign expert, Innocent Odu.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
Well, without taking much of a time, the big issue of the day is the Russia-Ukraine war and its global impact. Well, the small country Ukraine had no choice than to engage in a war with Russia that invaded its country, and the result of that had been the destruction and death that has elicited global condemnation. And of course, Russia appears to be adamant. And of course, it would not want Ukraine to join NATO. And of course, Ukraine is insisting because it believes it's a sovereign nation. And we've seen the sanctions from other countries, the European Union, and this has left the world wondering whether this will not escalate into a third world war. You know what I'm saying? The issues are just there in the public domain, and we're hearing news of what is actually going on there. But I think first of all, let's look at the situation. The war being led by Russia. Is it necessary? Is there no way Russia would have handled this matter than to go into a full-scale war with that small country, Ukraine?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. And you see, in national interests or in global, in a global perspective, nations pursue national interests in the best way they feel they can do that.
Oh.
And I think that is what the Russian president has done by sending his forces to invade Ukraine. In some parlance, we may see it as what? Preemptive action or preemptive strike to stop what he feels is a threat to his domain, to his country. Because Ukraine joining NATO, he perceives it as a threat in a sphere of influence where Russia had originally, had dominance. Remember, even the ethnic Ukrainians, a lot of them are actually ethnic Russians. They speak Russian language. You understand? They have Russian culture. So there's this close affinity that they have, such that if they join NATO, the Russian government feels that this is a very, very serious problem on their hands, because it will not expose its backyard to the influence, possibly even destabilizing influence of NATO in that region. And that is a preemptive action that Putin is trying to take. Maybe he has been tactless about how he went about it, but the purpose, we should also understand the Russians' position in the whole matter. Maybe he was tactless and had no strategy in the way he handled this matter, but we cannot rule out the possibility that he is actually trying to protect the sphere of influence of Russia, and then, of course, Russia's national security. Now, by the way, this is not the first time that nations have taken, preemptive actions in a place where they see danger coming to their national interest. I'll give you an example. The US that is leading the NATO, alliance today, the US had once, when they at the peak of the Cold War, during the days of the Soviet Union, that is also led by this Russia. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962? The Russians, the Soviet Union actually wanted to install, or they have already installed, nuclear equipment in Cuba. What happened? When the American president then, John Kennedy, discovered what the Russians were trying to do in his own backyard, Cuba, in fact, Kennedy was speaking to Khrushchev that time, because Kennedy, in fact, in that balance, they call it K speaks to K. Kennedy of America speaking to Khrushchev of the USSR. So the world actually came to the brink of a nuclear, clash, until the Soviet Union saw a lot of reason to remove those nuclear equipment in Cuba. Why is that? But Cuba is a very sovereign country. Does it not have the right to associate with any nation that it deems fits, or to join any association that it deems fits, or to allow any nation that it has an alliance with to establish anything in its own territory? But the thing is that the fear of one country's national interest, or what one country does, might actually trigger the fear of trigger fear of to another country because of its own national interest. So we can see that play out in several locations. We saw during the Iran-Iraq war of 1980 to 1988. The same thing happened when Israel. Remember, there's a nuclear plant, in Iran that Israel destroyed. Why? Because they perceived that was going to be a threat to their own national interest. So nations have done that to protect their own, sovereign interests. But the only problem, like I said, is Putin may not necessarily have applied the right tactic or the right measure to be able to, withstand this backlash that is having as, a world opinion that is against him, the sanction that is crippling his economy, and so many things that are affecting him. Even the oil of Russia, he cannot sell like 25% of Europe oil. The Europe gets is from Russia. So, but that sanction is already giving them big problem, and the economy of Russia is suffering from it. So, but I'm thinking that today, yesterday they had a talk, at the Belarusian border. There are some promises that something like a ceasefire may emerge. But I'm also hearing that the Russians are planning another kind of blitzkrieg action, military action, to be able to make sure that they stop they end the war quickly as possible, and then enter into another kind of negotiation. So on the serious note, this is the development so far. It is not going to be it's not a very promising situation for Ukraine. That's why the fact that it's having a lot of backing from the international community. It's not a good time for them at all. I'm telling you. It's also not a good time for Russia because of the backlash they are facing.
Thank you very much, Innocent. And Silas, you heard what Innocent just said now. NATO is expanding towards the east, closer to Russia. They want Ukraine to join NATO, and this is what Putin doesn't want. Can America accept it? If a country like Mexico is in a military alliance that is against its own interest, because what we've seen in the media had been serious backlash for Putin and Russia. But let's face the issue squarely. And then from what you see, you know that Putin has a just cause to fight. But the approach, according to Innocent, is wrong.
Yeah,
wrong.
The reign of international politics and sport interest is a bit fluid. There's no one formula about it. Okay, from where I look at it, and America will, of course, not like to have a foreign power, an enemy of America in its backyard. Just like you said about the Cuban crisis and the war came to the brink of war at the time. But that was Cold War. At that time, there was a bipolar world, the East and the West. And you cannot really say that there's a Cold War, so to speak, going on. Only that since Putin came, the prestige of that war, which Russia lost, okay, after the US dismembered into 15 or 16 nations. He came to power afterwards. So like that thing has still been in him that he feels a bit that maybe should have gone one way or the other. So you could see that there are some of the actions that are taken in the past, like sending Russian spies to poison anybody that didn't like cross Europe. Remember those deadly poisons, even to opponents, anybody who's spoken, even in Europe. So coming to the question you asked, I think that he said something about tactics. There are many ways to achieve a goal, and especially this kind of trend. It's possible that Russia could have had Ukraine, since they have strong physical ties, to remain its friend over the time. But how can they remain friends when Russia had annexed Crimea, the very rich part of resource-rich part of Ukraine 8 years ago, and Russia is supporting, rebels, terrorists, rebels and separatists against Ukraine. So you can see the build-up why Ukraine has felt uncomfortable with this big brother, Russia. Possibly, if Russia had it's possible that those countries around US now, like Mexico and Co, because of what they get from America, they will not even consider the, of turning against America by allying with the enemy. So possibly if Russia had worked with Ukraine, they would not have needed to take this action they're taking, which in the long run will hurt both nations. What comes with a period of diplomacy, and after, like I said, after everyone still have to go to the table to talk about it. So I think it is the aggressive actions of Russians over the last few years that is forcing Ukraine to try to join NATO to protect itself. And even today, we're talking about Ukraine joining EU, looking for where it can get help. If this people is bringing down my neck, is a sponsoring separatists, is annexing a part of me, why would they be comfortable to work with Russia? And they will look for those who are not likely to hurt them. And that's why you see them moving this way. So, like I said, there could have been a way out that Russia and Ukraine could have existed peacefully without going to war. But like I said earlier, like I said earlier, the tactics applied is what it is, and it can cause more damage to world peace if it's not well handled.
Well, Innocent, Silas is actually agreeing with you that the approach is what may have been wrong. But at the end of the day, in this case, what are the mechanisms to apply to resolve this kind of war? Because Ukraine wants to join NATO. The only thing that is stopping Ukraine is that NATO has not opened its door, and that is what Russia too would not want. You understand? And you see, it has to do with two people agreeing. But when they are adamant towards their own position, it's always difficult. So what mechanism then would have been applied?
Okay.
If let's assume that the approach taken by Russia was wrong.
Okay. At the beginning of this whole thing, I said that the approach of the Russian president, I'm specific about the regime of Putin.
Putin, yes,
might be very, very tactless, by going into outright war to go violate the sovereignty of Ukraine. The thing is that right now, Ukraine not joining NATO, like you said, was a result of the delay on the part of NATO itself. But the problem, and that delay was because they also want to appease Russia, because they understand the position of Russia on Ukraine joining NATO. Right. So that very thing that they're actually trying to avoid has not happened.
And they're regretting now.
And now they are regretting. So the question is, many other countries are even calling on NATO to admit Ukraine immediately so that they can deploy, forces to go and defend Ukraine. But that will not happen, I'm afraid, because the US does not want, in fact, even the no-fly zone that was suggested yesterday, the US said they are not going to apply that no-fly zone because how to enforce it may bring them into direct confrontation with Russia. And that is not what they want. They don't want that to happen. The US president has already declared that they are not going to send any troops whatsoever to Russia because they want to avoid any confrontation with Russia. You understand that? So these are basically the issues that are troubling the world now. Russia's position, how do they now resolve the issue? What do you now do to appease this Russia? Because they are hell-bent on carrying out this action they have already started. They are not going back. Yes, there might be some negotiation going on, but they have to do some concessions. Both sides have to concede that, okay, this is what give and take. There should be that kind of thing. And that has to happen in the coming days. If not, I'm afraid Ukraine does not have the power to face Russia in any serious way. Yeah, maybe the Russians may have suffered a little setback because that's not what they envisaged. But what they planned was that's what they call a military term, they call blitzkrieg, a very sharp and sharp action that achieves a very short result, and that's all. Submission. But that has not happened. So they are now deploying more troops, well-funded, heavily armed, moving into that Ukraine, and they're about 60 miles close to the Ukraine. So when an enemy is already 60 miles to your country, that is conquest coming. Except maybe by some special kind of thing that you'll be able to repel them. So, but I'm afraid they need a lot of dialogue. They don't have the power to face Russia in this challenge.
Thank you very much, Innocent. You talk of dialogue, but the whole thing is dicey here because now that the war involves the world superpower like Russia, world bodies, especially the major one like the United Nations, appears impotent in resolving the issue. The United Nations voice is not as loud as we hear European Union, NATO itself, and some other countries like France and the rest trying to impose sanctions, trying to talk out, trying to ask Russia to tread with caution. We've not heard much about the United Nations, and that is something that begins to worry because Russia has a say in the UN. It has a voting right.
Yes, they are a member of the UN
It has a
Security
veto.
Council.
So the politics, the global politics is such that at the end UN will always want to protect very very key members like that. So when a world body like the United Nations is not even coming out to say, how do you think this kind of thing?
No, the UN actually met yesterday, I think in an emergency session. The UN General Assembly met yesterday. And they were all talking about trying to have a ceasefire so that there will not be this bloodshed that we're having now. We should stop it, come back to the negotiating table, and have something resolved. Russia is not an ordinary nation. It's also a big member of the UN and a member of the Security Council. Because when you actually decide issues like this, it's not even in the UN General Assembly. It's in the UN Security Council. And Russia is a member of that council and has a veto power. So this is a very serious situation for even all the other members of the UN Security Council. And remember, China is also there, and they are not readily opposing what Russia is doing right now, even though there are some, areas that they may not have find comfortable in terms of the invasion of, Ukraine. So I think overall, it's a very big problem for the United Nations now because the big powers are involved in it.
In it, of course.
Yes, very powerful problem. And let me also assure you something before we round up. Okay. You see this NATO, I see NATO personally as a destabilizing force. NATO, in fact, was a problem to us in Africa because of how they brought down the regime of Gaddafi. And we are suffering the consequences today in Africa. When the Gaddafi regime fell, the weapons that Gaddafi gathered were thrown open, and all the criminal elements were now bringing them in here. So Boko Haram, ISIS, ISWAP, and the rest of them, all the bandits that you see in the country, all had access to weapons. And today we are in terror. They're terrorizing us here. So NATO, to be honest with you, is actually not to me, it's actually not something they can trust because they are part of the problem. They are a destabilizing agent. So that is why Russia is looking at them that way.
Well, thank you, Innocent. I think that was, you see, Silas, we don't have much time again, but there are reports that near Poland, Nigeria, where Nigeria and other nationals are amassing to escape from the war in Ukraine, they are being discriminated against. And we now see this racism playing out. And to show you that we in Africa, we are always in trouble because when things like this happen, we are always the direct victims. Because while other countries and other are having citizens of other countries are having the normal escape route, these ones, Africa, Nigeria, and some other African countries have been blocked as well borders on racism. And you think African leaders are doing enough to address this?
No, I don't think so. I think that everybody saw this war coming. Everybody tried to keep person. And it didn't appear as if Nigerian government and African governments did prepare the grounds to evacuate their citizens from the place. So by the time everybody caught up in the war, so when the war breaks out, people become lawless. So, and when there's a desperation everywhere, and some of those latent racist tendencies, they quickly come to the fore. Of course, we expect the Europeans to treat the Europeans, their African brothers, more easily and better than they treat these African migrants and some of them as urchins. So that is that is to be expected. The rest issue, the other countries can just be putting over it, but it is it is deep in their system. Okay, so what Nigeria could have done, which we never had ever do, was to have prepared the ground to this Nigerians out of place. And not to subject them to rushing to the border like that. So I saw a bit of Nigerians screaming their heads off that they are stranded and no, we're not seeing anybody to cook to them. And I learned from some source that even the Nigerian ambassador to Poland was in Nigeria recently. I don't know what is doing Nigeria when, he's supposed to be the president of Nigeria in Poland, huh? And Nigerian people are caught up there, and he's like, what is doing Nigeria? Whatever he's doing, he should quickly carry it up and go back, because Nigerian citizens, he's their president there, are looking for his head.
Well, thank you very much, Silas. Just finally, before we run up, Innocent, you see, Nigeria is a major power in Africa, and a major conflict like the Russia-Ukraine war is happening, and the voice of Nigeria is not heard while other world powers are talking. Does it mean that Nigeria has lost its mood, its influence, and how do we put it? And mood in the continent, its clout, of course.
Well, Nigeria has spoken actually. The foreign minister, I think it was over the weekend.
No, what they were talking about is about evacuation.
Before they started talking about evacuation, the Nigerian government summoned the ambassadors of Russia and Ukraine, and he made it clear to them, especially to the Russian ambassador, that Nigeria does not support the invasion of a sovereign nation, and told him to ask his country to pull back the forces they have sent into Ukraine. I think that's a statement of a nation that does not support an invasion of another country. Yeah. So the voice may not have been the language may not have been too harsh or strong enough,
or too forceful.
At least Nigeria had made a statement that they don't support the invasion of Ukraine and Russia.
Well, that is the much we can take for the big issue. And of course, I hope you had a very wonderful time being with us. And of course, I'll thank our in-house analysts, Silas and Innocent, for addressing the big issue the way it should be. The war in Ukraine is ongoing. Russia is not ready to pull out anytime soon. And Ukraine is not actually ready to give up in its position. That would have led to the war, the idea of joining NATO. It's an unfolding event. And of course, news trickling in has it that countries like the United Kingdom have started donating weapons, apart from other aids, other materials, intervention materials. They are also donating weapons to Ukraine that has insisted that it was ready to defend itself. Well, let's see how it goes. Thank you for keeping tab with us. Join us same time tomorrow for another edition of The Big Issue. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you for watching. For sponsorship and advert placements, please contact 080-3688-6158. Last Word Leadership Podcast Studio. You have the last word.